We put on this event in response to a conversation we had in a group that Catie and I co-facilitate, which is called Our Local Firm. It's a social connection and wellbeing hub for small business owners based in Maroondah. The letters in FIRM stand for our 4 values, which are fun, inspiration, relationships and meaning. And our 2 other facilitators, Tegan Rose and Jen Riseborough, can't be with us today. But the 5th member of our troop is Liam Maguire, who is helping us in the background today. We run learning lunches and we provide members with lots of resources they can use for their personal wellbeing, their family wellbeing and their workplace wellbeing. And that's what our local firm is about.
At the last of those lunches, Peter mentioned psychosocial hazards, and we noticed a few people's reactions and their sort of eyes are rolling around in their heads. And we offered to run this free session to help people come to terms with what positive duty and psychosocial hazards are and what that really means for business owners or managers within a business. So we're going to tackle this today is by explaining each one of them to you, where they come from and why, what each of the psychosocial hazards means, and we'll also give you a number of questions to take away and consider in the context of your workplace, because one size does not fit all.
Just a couple of things you might think about with this stuff. When you look at those psychosocial hazards, if you flip your mindset, you'll find that the absence of any of these hazards in your workplace is a good thing and something to promote and celebrate. The other is, when we ask these questions, have a think about whether you as a business owner or others might be doing this to yourself, and be kind to yourself in the process. It's one of the reasons we set up our local firm, was to provide social connection for people to feel safe where they can come and talk about this stuff.
So what is a positive duty? Well, you know that we've been told for years that to be compliant, we have to have the policies and procedures in place and tell people about them and apply them if something happens or if someone makes a complaint. Well, now that's actually not good enough. And in fact, what most people don't know is that we have a positive duty to prevent harassment, discrimination, and victimisation for quite a number of years. And last year, a new positive duty to prevent sexual harassment was also legislated federally. So put simply, a positive duty is a duty on persons conducting a business or an undertaking of such to take positive action to prevent, eliminate or control, and minimise psychosocial hazards. This means you have to do a real risk assessment and put in place real actions and real control plans, and not just in paper. So like you would do a physical risk assessment, you need to do a psychosocial risk assessment now.
So it is a big step up in compliance. As Catie said, you know, the traditional approach of having a policy, telling people about it and requiring them to comply isn't good enough anymore. And what we actually need to do is go and see if there are problems and fix them. Which brings us to the question of what are psychosocial hazards. So last year, Safe Work Australia published a model code for managing psychosocial hazards at work. It defines psychosocial hazards as hazards that arise from or in relation to the design or management of work, the working environment, plant at a workplace, or workplace interactions or behaviours, and which may cause psychological and physical harm. The code details 14 types of psychosocial hazards, which we'll explain the basics of today. And the code is representative of what organisations should be doing to meet the positive duty, but as often happens, different states are at different stages in legislating, and implementing the positive duty, and there may be slight differences between requirements in each state. So if you operate across multiple states, you might need to get legal advice as to exactly what the requirements are in that particular workplace. Just like to sort of make the point that we know that there are significant issues with mental health across the community, and that the odds are, the stats say that 1 in 4 people probably will have a mental health issue of some sort this year. So if somebody is struggling with something, it becomes even more difficult for them if they come to work and they don't have a supportive environment. And what we've got to understand is that the workplace can exacerbate these problems, and that is still something that employer has to deal with. So as we work through these, you can have a think about whether there's anybody in your workplace who may be struggling with a bit, and who maybe some of these factors might be affecting in some way. Then, look at what might be done to support them in whatever space they're in.
So job demands is the first hazard, and it really involves sustained or intense levels of physical, mental, or emotional effort, which are unreasonable and chronically exceed an employee's or a worker's skill, or sustained levels of physical, mental, or emotional effort. So some of the questions you might like to ask yourselves to assess job demands, psychosocial hazards are there people who don't take time off and perhaps might have an excessive annual leave accrual balance? Do people have challenges in managing competing work priorities? Is there anyone who doesn't have enough work to do? Because that is a psychosocial hazard. It's going to be a real tongue twister today. And do people have to wait on others to complete work before they do their own, or before they can access the tools and resources they need to do their jobs? So when I was working in construction, we used to have an estimator that had to wait on the draftsperson to finish their work before they could move on to do their job. So it was quite demotivating for that person to wait around, because he didn't give anything else to be done. He didn't get other tasks allocated to him.
It's interesting, it's not just high demands, it's low demands that come in there.
Yeah.
The second one is low job controls. So this hazard involves workers who have little control or say over the work or aspects of the work, including how and where the work is done. And I think it's also when. Some questions that you might want to ask to assess whether or not low job control is an issue. A change is made to people's work areas or work processes, systems or resources without consulting the affected workers. I'd firstly note that there's a legal obligation to consult people about those sorts of changes, but if people experience change and they don't understand it, then they can react to it. Do you have managers who micromanage people because the manager feels they have to stay on top of things and that people don't make mistakes? Are workers often in situations which expose them to aggression or abuse? And you can think, obviously, people in our emergency services are in that sort of boat, but it could be people in retail or hospitality or other areas of work. And the where one, are there any workers who want to work from home but are not allowed to? One of the most common complaints that I hear from workers is that someone changed something without talking with them. There was one where there was a redesign of a workplace without consulting the worker, and he came in the next day most upset and said, "Who took my table? Because it's where I have my lunch." and there are plenty of other examples of those sorts of things. We often hear the term unintended consequences when change happens. Oh, we were doing this and there was an unintended consequence. Often as not, that's because the right people haven't been consulted. So it's important to do that, to not give people unpleasant surprises.
The third one along the way is poor support. And there are a range of ways in which people might be poorly supported, like how their supervisors or other workers interact with them, or not having the availability or the quality of the resources available to enable them to do their job. And there is actually a lot more to this one, but some of the questions that can help you understand or assess poor support related psychosocial hazards might include: do people receive insufficient, unclear or contradictory information related to their field? Can workers access supervisors consistently to make decisions and provide them with the guidance that they need? Is the workplace culture competitive and discouraging of people helping each other? And we see quite often in high sales environments that we have sales people competing against each other, and that can be quite debilitating to them. And because they don't want to share leads or they don't want to share clients because they think they have to reach their targets and they will do anything, we have to reach targets, we have to get this, or my job is on the line. So there needs to be some support put around that in terms of helping them out and working through their pipelines and getting other lead generation for them.
The next one's lack of role clarity. It's, from people being subject to unclear, inconsistent or frequently changing roles, changes in responsibilities or changes in expectations, and not having clear and accurate information. Some of the questions that can arise are whether people are properly inducted in the organisation, their team and their role. And there are those three things. It's one thing to do an induction into an organisation, and then, and that's very common. There is an induction process. But what happens when I move to a new team? Am I inducted into that? And what happens if I move to a new role? Am I inducted into that properly? So these things all need to be done at what the Michelle Maguire group, who we do work with, call the me, we and us levels. Do people receive instructions from multiple people and they're not clear about who they report to? I've certainly been in organisations where people can have up to half a dozen bosses in their own mind, and nobody really takes responsibility for the whole employee. Are there mixed messages or inconsistencies in communications and performance standards, or do those standards seem to change from day to day or depending on who you talk to? One of the challenges that lots of organisations have is they actually don't have standard procedures that give people proper instruction on what they need to do in their job. And do people lack understanding of why work processes are designed as they are? So one of the things that I'm a great advocate for is asking the question why. Why is it so? So if sometimes people don't take steps because they don't understand the importance of them. Most induction programs that I see are focused on telling people rules and getting them to sign something to say that have been told. So they're really done from a compliance perspective. I think that they should first focus on relationships, because relationships are really what drives business and drives performance. A tip: identify the 5 people that a new person is going to have most to do with in the business, and have the newbie ask 3 questions of them. What do you do? What do you rely on me for? And what do I rely on you for? And they'll start to get an understanding of where they fit and what the expectations of them are.
The next one is organisational change, and that's really about poorly planned, communicated, supported or managed, or lack of managed change. You can look at assessing this in a number of ways, but some of these questions might help you. Are workers genuinely consulted about the changes that affect them? Are impacts on performance of work in transition ongoing or given due consideration and appropriate adjustments made? So are they learning new skills? Have you given them opportunities to learn new skills or to transfer over and give them that induction or that onboarding process into that new role or team? And are changes poorly planned with no clear objectives, clear roles, or clear processes or timelines? And in a lot of cases, employees say that is one of the most demotivating factors is management not managing change effectively, and also telling, coming in the next day and saying, well, you've got a new job, this is it now, without having that consultation process and that communication process.
Okay, so the next one is inadequate reward and recognition. This is both formal and informal, and it's where there's an imbalance between a worker's effort and their perception of their effort and the recognition and reward that they get. A few questions here. Do people get unfair negative feedback or criticism or get blamed for things that they have no control over or where they do not have the training, resources or support they need? Do people not get the feedback that they need to understand and address improvements needed in their work performance or behaviour? And that's something we come across very commonly with things like unfair dismissal claims where a person hasn't been given, there isn't evidence the person has been given constructive feedback and been given the opportunity to improve. And as a result, the dismissal is deemed to be procedurally unfair. Is there favouritism or nepotism or any other unfair or biased or inequitable distribution of rewards and recognition? And got to be particularly conscious of this in family businesses where it can become an issue if family members are perceived to be treated differently to other staff. Are people not receiving their due entitlements under workplace laws? So I helped a friend of a friend out recently, someone who believed that she'd been underpaid for a long time, but was really stressed about raising with the boss, who was, according to her, a bit of a bully. And even though she was in the right, she got quite upset about it, and it really was a very anxious time for her. We gave her the tools that she needed and the evidence to have the conversation, and she got 6 years back pay, which was great for her. But she also had to take a couple of days off because the experience had exhausted her. And I can see the potential for, if businesses don't get it right with complying with their legal obligations, that they could be faced with a double whammy now with the psychosocial hazards coming in, with the anxiety that they cause the employee through the negligence of not getting the entitlements right, activating a secondary claim.
So poor organisational justice involves a lack of professional justice, which means fair processes to reach decisions, informational fairness, which means keeping people informed, and interpersonal fairness, which actually means treating people with dignity and respect. Questions that you may like to ask yourselves or use to assess the business are there failures to respect people's privacy or to protect confidentiality of their personal information? Are policies applied inconsistently or in a biased way, creating inequalities? Are there occurrences of actual or alleged cases of underperformance, misconduct, and harmful behaviour that are not addressed appropriately or not at all? Are there inequalities in the allocation of work or shifts or opportunities that are discriminatory or unfair? Now, a few years ago, I had to deal with in a banking and finance organisation, one of the top salespeople in this part of the bank, absolutely brilliant at what he did and got all the top sales, but his behaviour was absolutely reprehensible. people and the bosses or the management decided that they would oversee that because he was bringing in so much for the bank and for the business. But in the end, they had to do something about it because his behaviours were affecting other people, his other colleagues. So that really would now be deemed as that person would be deemed as a psychosocial hazard. And there has been some decisions made in the Fair Work over in Western Australia that a termination was fair and reasonable because that individual was a psychosocial hazard in the workplace for others. So just be mindful of that.
Yeah, great point. That was a really interesting case that we learnt about in the last week over in WA, where the language is being used. The positive duty is already legislated over there in relation to psychosocial hazards. So one of the things that's really important with this is that we understand that by shifting this compliance obligation to this new positive duty level, the various tribunals are going to look at the way they deal with these matters through those lenses. They'll shift with it. And so we'll see that language coming in unfair dismissal claims and the new sexual harassment jurisdiction at the Fair Work Commission as well. The next one is probably one that's easy to understand. It's traumatic events or material. So it's about people who witness, investigate, or are exposed to traumatic events or material. Someone's more likely to experience an event as traumatic if it's unexpected, is perceived as uncontrollable, or as a result of intentional cruelty. It also includes vicarious exposure, which is something that it's not directly affecting me, but I'm indirectly affected, and cumulative trauma. So people who are exposed to this repeatedly for long periods of time are likely to be affected. You know, we have all these stories about armed forces and police officers and ambers who, with cumulative trauma, you know, end up with serious stress disorder issues. So some things to think about. Do workers witness or have to investigate a fatality, a serious injury, abuse, neglect, or serious incident? And think of the legal profession, because they certainly are involved in this sort of stuff. Do people's jobs require them to deal with natural disasters, terrorism or war, and be exposed to their effects in the course of their work? We do a lot of work with members of the Civil Contractors Federation. They can get actively involved in natural disasters with bushfires and floods, and people can be affected by this stuff. Do workers support people who are victims of painful or traumatic events? And again, there are support workers in hospitals and community services and the like who are involved in this space. Does a worker's job involve viewing, listening to, or reading descriptions of painful or traumatic events experienced by others? One of the things that we do is conflict resolution stuff, and I had a week not long ago where I dealt with conflict every day for a week. And this requires tight emotional control. You've got to be conscious of your own reactions when you're dealing with things like this, managing others' behaviour and emotions, and trying to make sure everybody in the room is safe. Now, I've resolved never to do that again, because by the end of the week, I was absolutely stuffed. And it makes me wonder about people who do that stuff every day. And I mentioned lawyers before, but be kind to our lawyers, because they have to deal with a lot of this stuff. And the legal profession has one of the highest suicide rates in Australia. So next time you're speaking to your lawyer, bear that in mind.
The ninth psychosocial hazard that's listed in the Safe Work Australia's model code of practice is remote isolated work. So this hazard, why is it a psychosocial hazard? Well, it involves two things. The first one is work that is isolated from the assistance of other people because of location, time, or the nature of work. The second area is working in environments where there are long travel times, poor access to resources, or communications that are limited or difficult. So I currently work with a international business, and they have employees in Sweden, in Vietnam, in Indonesia, in Hungary, in the Middle East, and in Australia. So how do we go about doing that? We just make sure that we have a period of time during the day that everybody has to be contactable. It's about 4 hours. So that makes sure that people aren't feeling as isolated or remote when they're thinking about their work. They can ask those questions and things. So some of the questions you can ask yourself to assess the psychosocial hazard in your workplace is there limited access to recreational opportunities or opportunities to escape work issues, particularly for those workers that are living in accommodation in remote areas? So think of the FIFO, the mining organisation. Is life balance, access to support networks, and the ability to meet family responsibilities compromised by working and living remotely? And if so, how can you put measures in place to counterbalance that? And is there anyone who just works on their own, for example, a shift worker or a night worker, and how does that impact them and their psychosocial hazard?
Poor physical environment is the next psychosocial hazard. So this is when employees are exposed to unpleasant, poor quality or hazardous working environments or conditions. So things like mines and construction sites, but also, hospitals, etc., come to mind about environments where people might have difficult physical environments. Few questions to think about. Do people perform demanding work while wearing uncomfortable, personal protective of other equipment, etc., which has been particularly relevant during COVID? Do workplace conditions such as poor lighting, high noise, or uncomfortably high or low temperatures affect workers' concentration or ability to complete tasks? This could be work in remote environments, it could be in freezers, it could be in furnaces, it could be in all sorts of places. Is any equipment poorly maintained so that it has become unsafe or noisy or it vibrates? And sometimes we have, for instance, in manufacturing, if things aren't going that well, then they might compromise on maintenance of the forklift, and that can have dire consequences. Do work-related accommodation facilities and amenities contribute to worker fatigue because they are noisy, uncomfortable, or prevent workers from getting enough sleep? So where you might have people who are away on a conference, or people who are working remotely from home and in an accommodation that's provided by the business, or maybe they just go and rent a pub. Are they actually in an environment which is going to prevent them from getting sleep? And how do we deal with that? In terms of a physical environment, probably the one that comes to mind most of recent years has had to do with lockdowns and working from home, because there's so many homes where the physical environment, it just wasn't equipped with the space and ergonomics to accommodate a couple trying to work out of, for example, a one-bedroom flat.
This hazard of violence and aggression involves violence or threats of violence from other workers, including workers of other businesses, as well as customers, clients, suppliers, contractors, patients, or inmates. It includes assault and other aggressive behaviours, like yelling and physical intimidation. So some of the questions you may want to think about when you're assessing your business is, do people work in workplaces that handle high value or restricted items, or ones that are restricted in movement or poorly lit? For example, I had an instance in the Australian Mint where they were trying to dispose of currency that wasn't up to standard, and how they did that. So they were really handling high value stuff, and that was very much around the aggressive behaviour of that manager doing managing that place. The second question you might like to think about asking is, do workers' jobs require them to work in a community or in people's homes or any other unpredictable environment where another person may pose a risk to that worker? So think about a home carer going into a patient's home that could be very high risk. And does the work involve employees interacting with customers or other people face-to-face or online or by phone, and how that potential aggressive behaviour can be a psychosocial hazard for your workers?
These last few that we're dealing with from that one on what are around inappropriate behaviour and how we change it. So the next one's bullying, which is repeated unreasonable behaviour directed towards a worker or a group of workers that creates a risk to health and safety. And it could be workers, it could be workers from the same business, workers from another business, could be customers, could be clients, patients, visitors, or others. And some questions to think about with this. Are leaders autocratic and directive rather than giving workers a voice on decisions that affect them? Is demeaning and abusive behaviour tolerated and not appropriately addressed in a timely manner? We do come across a lot of employers who say that, they don't want to tackle things, they don't want to upset people. They don't want to lose people by making things too hard, but really everyone deserves to have a respectful workplace. Are there cliques in your workplace which result in some workers being socially excluded because leaving them out repeatedly as a habit is bullying? Are there people in your workplace who habitually fail to provide the support that workers rely on them for? So, and sometimes this can be that because they're being competitive, or it can be they just don't get on. Sometimes there are managers who don't get on, and their teams becomes a bit of an us and a them between their teams. So one of the things I'd also like to add is that while we can criticise leaders for coming on too strong, we also see lots of instances of workers bullying their bosses. So do you know anyone whose response when challenged on something is to push straight back with some counterclaim or criticism? Because if that's a repeated habit, then that's bullying too.
The second last hazard is around harassment, which includes sexual harassment. And this is around, as Peter said, these last two around the behaviours. So harassment is due to harassment is personal characteristics such as age, disability, race, nationality, religion, political affiliation, sex, relationship status, family or carer responsibilities, sexual orientation, gender identity, or intersex status. The definition of sexual harassment is any unwelcome sexual advance, unwelcome requests for sexual favours, or other unwelcome conduct of a sexual nature in circumstances where a reasonable person having regard to all of these circumstances would anticipate the possibility that the person harassed would be offended, humiliated, or intimidated. Harmful behaviour that does not amount to bullying, such as a single instance, but creates a risk to health and safety, can also be called harassment. So some of the questions to think about when looking at your workplace is, do leaders lack understanding of the nature, drivers, and impacts of sexual harassment? In other words, are you providing them with the tools to lead and manage in an effective way around that subject? Are there increased risks on occasions when alcohol is involved in work-related activities, or when people are attending events or conferences as part of their work? That very much is still part of the workplace. And I've had some instances where there's been some harassment, including sexual harassment, happen at conferences, and we've had to say goodbye to those particular employees as a result of their behaviour. Are there people who are potentially exposed to harassment because they're working in unpredictable environments, like in the community or clients' homes? And does the business lack a commitment to diversity, inclusion, and equity in policy and in practice? Once again, it's not about what's written, it's about how you communicate that and action it in a practical sense within the workplace.
What Catie ran through there with respect to the different characteristics for harassment is as it's stated in the National Code. Since then, under the Albanese government's amendments, there have been some additional protected attributes come in around pregnancy and some other things. So that gets us on to the final one, which is conflict or workplace relationships and interactions, which I think is capturing everything that doesn't fit under bullying or harassment or violence and aggression. And there's obviously a bit of crossover between those. This hazard involves poor workplace relationships or interpersonal conflict between colleagues or with other businesses, clients or customers. It may involve frequent disagreements, disparaging or rude comments from one person or multiple people. A worker can be both the subject and the source of the behaviour. It could also be inappropriately excluding a worker from work-related activities, as I referred to under bullying. Some questions. Is the workplace one where staff are encouraged to compete with each other and so they don't support each other? There are some industries where it can be common, particularly when they're commission-based, to have people competing to be the top dog, as it were, in the business, and they're encouraged to do that to drive sales and results. That can result in anxieties and it can result in conflict. Are there managers or customers who make unreasonable demands on workers and are critical or complain when they don't get what they want? And I recall one episode many years ago where there was a sales rep who consistently went and overpromised and put the factory under pressure. And as much as he was told time and again, he got the sales results, so he was rewarded. And all that did was encourage him to repeat that behaviour, but he was still putting the whole supply chain under pressure. Is the leadership team dysfunctional and not respected by workers? So if the leadership team isn't getting on, then how can you hope to manage conflict downstream? And does the workplace lack the policies and procedures and the training that are needed to set appropriate standards of behaviour and to effectively deal with any instances of disrespectful or unsatisfactory conduct? One of the things that's coming through with all of this is very much that it's necessary for businesses to have in place the right processes so that they deal with these issues fairly, but also so that you can demonstrate that you have if there happens to be a challenge.
There's a lot in this and a lot for people and for you, for business owners to get their heads around. And the Leaders Lab, which is part of the Michelle McQuaid group, is running a certificate in leading safety and care, which is all about managing these psychosocial hazards with a positive mindset. And Peter and I start that program tomorrow morning, and we will have lots of other tools that we can use to help businesses to deal with all of this in a positive way.
Before closing, I want to recommend a couple of free tools that you can access for yourself and your business. The PERMA Workplace Wellbeing Survey is based on the work of the guru of positive psychology, Professor Martin Seligman, and has been developed in conjunction with the positive psychology school at the University of Melbourne, Dr. Peggy Kern. It's a free survey using world's best practice to do assessments of personal well-being. The survey is free. It can be accessed at that link. For organisations with 25 plus employees, you can do a whole workplace version of that and get a report back on the state of the well-being in the whole workplace. It's now been extended to incorporate these 14 psychosocial hazards, so you can use it as part of doing the risk assessment that you have to do in relation to psychosocial hazards, and that will help you then to form an action and control plan. It isn't a huge investment. A year's license, and you can do it any number of times, with the psychosocial add-ons is under $3,000. So it's not a huge cost, particularly when you consider the situation here. If you're in or around Maroondah, there is a special program being run by Communities of Wellbeing using this survey where you can access it at a significantly discounted price. Or if you're a smaller business where you've got under 25 employees, you can get access to heavily discounted, or in some cases free, debriefing services to help you unpack the survey with your people. So there are some good opportunities there if people are interested in doing that. The second thing that I put in there was around character strengths, which are an integral part of wellbeing, is understanding your strengths and getting the opportunity to use them. Something that I've found transformative personally. And again, it's a free survey tool. I encourage people to do it, learn from it, unpack it with, get your team members to do it. There are paid versions of this, which cost about $70 each, but you get a basic report back telling you your order of strengths from 1 to 24 for free. Thank you for attending. Here are our contact details. You're welcome to call Catie or I. If anybody's interested in our local firm, then please contact one of us, and we're happy to have a chat. Thanks, Liam, for your help in the background. Thanks, Catie, for your contribution. And I'd just give a little plug to Georgia Braun Hutchison, one of our members of our local firm, who did this wonderful branding for us. The colours are fantastic. I love them. And so thanks, Georgia. As I said earlier, if you had a look at these psychosocial hazards from a different perspective of, do I want a workplace where there are good workplace relationships, where that are free from bullying, where there's no sexual harassment, where people feel properly rewarded, etc., then I think the answer is yes, we would, wouldn't we?